The marble floors of the lobby gleamed beneath the harsh white lights, as if every tile had been scrubbed in anticipation of important eyes scanning them for imperfections. The air smelled faintly of jasmine perfume and coffee grounds, and the cafe tucked in the corner phones rang intermittently, their shrill tones cutting through the steady hum of conversation, and the tapping of keyboards behind the wide reception desk. A young woman sat with her chin tilted upward as though the world existed to be inspected by her narrow gaze. Her manicured nails clicked against the keyboard more for effect than necessity. Through the rotating glass door stepped a man dressed simply in a tailored but understated jacket, dark jeans, and polished shoes. His gait was calm, steady, unhurried. His eyes carried the gravity of someone used to rooms falling silent at his presence. Yet here no one recognized him, no one except the receptionist, whose gaze narrowed as if she had spotted an intruder. She measured him with a glance, taking in his skin, his casual attire, and instantly drawing a conclusion. He approached the desk, offering a polite nod and a measured smile. "Good morning. I am here for a meeting," he said. His voice was deep, even, and calm. The receptionist barely glanced at the monitor before giving him a smile that was more condescension than courtesy. "And who exactly are you here to see?" she asked, drawing out each word with exaggerated patience. He replied with clarity the name of the very person who reported directly to him, but her expression did not change. She leaned back, folded her arms, as if she had caught a lie of the way she looked at him, said, "Everything. You don't belong here. You're not one of us." She tapped the counter with her nail and said, "You will need to wait outside, sir. We cannot have people loitering in the lobby." A few heads turned. Nearby workers seated in the lounge lifted their eyes curious, then quickly looked away. No one dared interfere. The man remained perfectly still, his posture composed, but inside the sting was sharp. He had been here before, not this building, not this exact circumstance, but this sensation of being dismissed, judged, reduced to an assumption. He inhaled slowly and said, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." The receptionist shook her head, already calling security on the phone in front of her. Her voice shifted higher with practiced authority. "Hello? Yes, we have someone here refusing to follow directions. Can you come to the front lobby, please?" She ended the call and gave him a thin smile. "You heard me. You need to wait outside." Her voice carried enough to draw whispers from a group of interns gathered near the elevators. They watched with interest, some with smirks, some with unease. The man turned his gaze toward them briefly and saw in their faces what he had seen countless times before: amusement at his humiliation. As if watching a play unfold at his expense, he straightened his jacket and said calmly, "I assure you, there is no need for security. I belong here." That last sentence hung in the air, but she dismissed it with a scoff. "Belong here," she repeated with mocking emphasis. "Do you know how many people wander in here claiming that? Well, not on my watch, sir. You can take it outside." The automatic doors hissed as two security guards entered. Their faces were polite, but firm, trained in neutrality. They looked at the receptionist for direction, and she gestured toward her with a nod, as though delivering a prize to them. Of the guards said, "Sir, we're going to have to ask you to step outside, please." The man turned to the guards, his eyes steady. He recognized the discomfort in their posture. They knew something about this felt off, yet they followed protocol. He nodded slowly and replied, "Of course I will step outside." The receptionist allowed herself a victorious smile, as if she had proven something. She did not realize the victory belonged only to her ignorance. He walked past the guards and through revolving doors into the brisk air of the city. The sounds outside felt different, louder, freer, yet charged with a quiet storm building inside him. He stood at the edge of the sidewalk, watching the steady flow of traffic, the horns, the engines, the chatter of pedestrians, all blended into a dull roar. He placed his hands in his pockets, his fingers brushing the phone, waiting there. He thought about every step that had brought him here, the countless times he had been underestimated, the doors slammed in his face, the boardrooms where his voice had been drowned until he made it impossible to ignore. For a moment, he almost laughed the absurdity of it all. The woman who thought herself a gatekeeper of an empire. She barely understood the irony that in less than an hour her smug certainty would collapse on her head. He looked up at the towering glass facade of the building. It shimmered in the morning sun, a monument to arrogance and pretense. His eyes reflected it, but behind them burned a fire as steady as it was silent. Inside the lobby, the receptionist no doubt returned to her seat, basking in the admiration of those two timid to challenge her. She believed she had reinforced order. She believed she had drawn a line and defended it. She had no idea that the man she sent outside was a line itself, and the eraser that could sweep her entire world away. He turned slightly and let the wind carry away the faint smile curling his lips. The battle had already begun. She just didn't know it yet. The cold air sharpened his focus as he drew the phone from his pocket and pressed a single button. A line clicked, and a voice answered, crisp, efficient, "Always ready, sir," the assistant said. "Do you want me to proceed?" The man looked up at the building, the glass, reflecting the sky like a shield, and he spoke with measured calm. "Yes, it is time." Inside the lobby, the receptionist returned to her throne behind the desk, tapping at her keyboard with the smug rhythm of someone who believed she had maintained order. She leaned toward a colleague, whispering loud enough for others to hear, "Did you see him? He actually thought he belonged here." Her laughter spilled into the space brittle and bright, drawing chuckles from those nearby. The security guards glanced at one another, but said nothing. They had their orders, and she had her power, or so she thought. Upstairs, executives shuffled through morning meetings, unaware that the foundation beneath their complacency had begun to shift. The assistant was already making calls, alerting department heads, scheduling an emergency appearance. Lawyers were contacted discreetly. Their pens sharpened, their presence requested with no explanation beyond urgency. Every step moved with precision, orchestrated by a man who had built an empire from disciplined patience and an unyielding refusal to bow. On the street, he began to walk slowly, circling the block, letting the minutes stretch with purpose. He thought of every slight, endured every door slammed, every eye that glanced past him as though he were invisible. He remembered the first boardroom, where his ideas had been stolen and passed off as someone else's brilliance. He remembered how they laughed when he bought his first company, believing it would fail. Within a year now, those same voices would tremble when they saw him stride back into their fortress, not as an outsider, but as a storm that would level it. Back at the reception desk, the young woman adjusted her blazer, straightened her hair, and prepared to retell her triumph to anyone who would listen. She described the intruder with exaggerated disdain. His jacket was nothing special, his shoes were polished, but not expensive enough. She ended with a dismissive shake of her head. "Some people just don't know their place." She said the interns laughed softly, emboldened by her arrogance, while others kept their eyes down, unwilling to join in but too afraid to object. The elevator doors opened with a chime, and a small group stepped out. A tall woman in a tailored suit, carrying a leather briefcase, moved briskly across the lobby. Her eyes scanned the room with the awareness of someone accustomed to command. She was followed by two men in sharp gray suits, and another assistant with a folder clutched tightly. The receptionist sat up straighter, sensing importance, but not understanding the scale. She offered a bright smile, hoping to be noticed. The tall woman did not even glance away. Instead, she stopped in the center of the lobby and spoke to the guards. Has anyone seen him? Her tone was clip-controlled. The guards exchanged a quick look, and one gestured toward the street. The woman nodded once and walked back to the doors. Her entourage, following the receptionist, frowned, curiosity prickling at her, but pride keeping her silent. She told herself it was unrelated. Moments later, the glass door swung open again, and the man returned. He did not walk alone this time. His assistant followed at his side, carrying documents already prepared. Behind them came the tall woman, the lawyers, the executives, all moving with quiet purpose. The energy in the lobby shifted instantly. Whispers rippled. Employees looked up from their screens, sensing a change, but not yet understanding. The receptionist froze, her practiced smile faltering. She tried to regain composure, straightening her posture. "Welcome back," she said with forced sweetness, but the words trembled slightly. The man did not respond. He kept his gaze forward, his stride unbroken. He moved as though he owned the ground beneath each step, which in truth he did. He stopped in the center of the lobby, his voice carrying with calm authority, "Good morning. I believe some of you may be wondering who I am." He paused, letting the silence stretch the weight of anticipation, pulling every eye toward him. "I am the chief executive officer of the company that owns this building, this branch, and every desk you sit behind." The words dropped like stones into water, sending shockwaves across the floor. The receptionist's mouth opened, then closed soundless. Her face drained of color as realization crashed over her. The intern stared wide-eyed. A few, even gasping, the guard stepped back instinctively, as though giving space to royalty. Revealed the colleagues she had boasted a moment ago shifted uncomfortably in their seats, pretending to be busy. He turned slowly, his gaze sweeping across the room until it settled on the receptionist. She tried to speak, stumbling over words. "I didn't know. I thought you were." He raised a hand, silencing her with the smallest gesture. "I know exactly what you thought." His assistant stepped forward, distributing documents to the lawyers, who moved aside, already preparing statements. The tall woman spoke, now her voice carrying steel. "We will be reviewing every employee's conduct today, starting with the incident that just occurred. Anyone found complicit in discrimination will be subject to immediate action." The receptionist's eyes darted from face to face, seeking rescue, but finding none, her earlier confidence dissolved, leaving only fear. The man regarded her for one long moment, then shifted his attention back to the crowd. "You will all understand something very clearly today. Respect is not optional. It is not conditional. The elevator doors opened to the top floor where a large conference room stretched with glass walls overlooking the city. The man stepped inside his entourage. Following close behind, already staff were gathering, summoned by urgent messages, whispered through hallways, and echoed across the building. Chairs scraped against the floor as people settled their nerves, unsure what awaited in the air, carried the tension of a courtroom moments before judgment. He stood at the head of the table, his posture unshaken, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. Every executive, every manager, every intern was present, faces pale, eyes darting, searching for answers. He spoke with a calm, deliberate cadence. "You all know me now. For some, this revelation is a surprise. For others, perhaps a discomfort. But what matters is not my title. It is what happened today in your lobby." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing. "A guest treated with arrogance is an embarrassment. A client dismissed with disdain is a failure. But for an owner to be insulted at the door of his own company, that is rot at the core culture." Murmurs rippled through the room, but quickly died under his steady gaze. He gestured to the tall woman beside him, who produced a tablet and began playing security footage. The room went still as the receptionist's mocking words echoed through the speakers. The smirk, the dismissal, the call to security, every second replayed in humiliating clarity. Faces in the room tightened, some with shame, some with fear. The receptionist herself stood near the back, trembling, her hands clenched around a notepad she could no longer write upon. The man spoke again. This was not an isolated moment. This was a reflection of something deeper, a culture that rewards arrogance over respect, that allows prejudice to pass unchecked, that ends today. The HR director shifted uncomfortably, but he fixed his eyes on her and continued. "You have policies that promise fairness, but promises mean nothing without enforcement. The woman at the desk is dismissed effective immediately, and those who encouraged or ignored such behavior will be reviewed starting now." The HR director nodded reluctantly, scribbling notes, but everyone could see the flush of guilt on her face. Gasps rose as the receptionist broke into pleas. Her voice cracked. "I didn't know who you were. I didn't mean it. It was a mistake. Please, I need this job." He regarded her without expression and said softly, "You didn't know who I was. You decided I was less than you, and that was enough. That choice defines you, not me." She crumpled into silence, tears streaking her makeup as eyes around the room turned away. He raised his voice so every corner of the room carried the sound. "From this moment forward, we rebuild this branch. Will not continue as it stands. Arrogance and entitlement have poisoned it so deeply that it cannot remain open. Effective today, this office is closed. The employees will be reassigned based on performance and integrity. Those who thrive in cruelty will not remain in this company at all." The silence was thunderous. A manager near the front shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. He had been the one to laugh with the receptionist only hours before he opened his mouth to protest, but the lawyers at the side were already noting his name. His argument withered before it could begin. The man leaned forward, his voice lowering, yet somehow striking harder than a shout. "Success is built on respect. Those who forget that destroy themselves. Today you learned that lesson." He turned away, signaling the end. His assistant gathered the documents, and the lawyers prepared the notices. The staff remained frozen in their chairs, some whispering in disbelief, others staring at the floor, as if the ground itself had betrayed them. As he walked out of the conference room, the receptionist stumbled after him, her voice desperate. "Please give me another chance. I will change, I promise." He stopped just long enough to deliver words that cut sharper than dismissal. "You should not promise change to me. You should have given respect to every person who ever stood at that desk." He walked on, leaving her standing hollow and trembling. The building felt different now, the same marble, the same glass, the same perfume in the air, but stripped of illusion. The employees no longer saw it as their fortress of status, but as fragile ground beneath a storm. His presence lingered even as he stepped through the revolving doors. Once more the city greeted him with noise and motion, yet he carried only silence in his chest, the silence of justice served. Weeks later, news spread across business channels. The closure of the branch, the swift firings, the cultural reforms rippled through the industry. Competitors whispered admiration and fear, while employees in other offices straightened their backs, resolved to never repeat the mistake. The receptionist was seen working behind a counter of a small retail shop. Her eyes dulled, her laughter gone. The world had moved on without her. The man stood once more at the top of a different building, a taller one, his own headquarters. He looked out across the skyline. The lights of the city, blinking like promises, kept his assistant approach, quietly asking if he wanted to prepare a statement for the press. He shook his head. "No, let the story speak for itself. People will understand." He allowed himself the smallest smile. The lesson was simple, yet powerful. Respect costs nothing, but arrogance costs everything. He turned from the window, already planning the future. knowing that in every room he entered no one would ever mistake him again. The night air was cool against his skin as he stepped out onto the balcony of his penthouse. Overlooking the city, the lights below shimmered like scattered jewels, each one a reminder of battles fought, and one behind him the soft hum of conversation faded as his team gave him space. They knew when silence was the greatest reward his mind, however, was not quiet. He replayed every word, every gesture from the confrontation in that office. The faces of those who had laughed at him, the trembling voice of the receptionist begging for mercy, the ripple of shock when he revealed who he truly was, all of it burned into memory, not as pain, but as fuel. His phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen and saw a message from one of the senior board members. Congratulations, you sent a message no one will forget. He typed a short reply, thank you. But this is not about me, this is about every person who has ever been told to wait outside. Far below, the streets pulsed with movement, taxis, rushing horns, blaring pedestrians, weaving through the chaos. He thought about the countless people who walked unseen into buildings where judgment lived. At the front desk, the receptionist had not invented that arrogance. She had only embodied it. And he knew that if he wanted real change, he had to cut deeper than one building or one branch. The culture itself had to be rewritten. The next morning, he stood before the press cameras, flashing microphones raised. Reporters shouted questions, their voices colliding. Who was a woman? Why close the branch? Will investors panic? He raised a hand, and the noise settled. His tone was even sharp enough to cut through the air. What happened yesterday is not about one receptionist or one office. It is about the way we treat people. The measure of a company is not in its glass walls or profits, but in the respect it shows to every individual who crosses its path. That is the future we will build. The word spread faster than fire. Headlines bloomed across news feeds. Black CEO shuts down branch over discrimination. Investors rally behind bold move. Videos of the confrontation leaked from employees. Phones a clip of the receptionist dismissing him went viral. Millions watching her smug certainty dissolve into terror. The internet turned the moment into a symbol, a warning, and a victory. In boardrooms across the city, rival executives whispered uneasily if he could do this to his own company. What would he do if he ever turned his gaze outward? Competitors who once mocked his rise now studied his methods, trying to imitate his authority, but knowing they lacked the steel beneath his calm. Meanwhile, inside his own company, fear shifted into loyalty. Employees who had once doubted him now looked at him with new respect. They understood that the rules had changed. Respect was no longer a line in a handbook. It was a law. Survival managers reviewed their teams with fresh eyes. HR departments scrambled to implement training, not because it was policy, but because it was survival. And in the quiet corners where whispers lived, people who had long endured casual slights began to stand taller. The interns who had laughed nervously in the lobby now spoke openly about what they had seen. They admitted their shame and promised to be better. One even approached him directly, trembling, but sincere. Thank you for showing us we have to be more than bystanders. He placed a hand on the young man's shoulder and said quietly, change begins when you choose courage over comfort. But not everyone accepted defeat. The manager, who had chuckled beside the receptionist, stewed in bitterness, nursing resentment rather than reflection. He whispered to allies plotting protective position, believing the storm had passed, yet the storm had only just begun. So had every name, every laugh, every silence cataloged. And he would not forget when the reviews were completed. The manager found himself stripped of title. Escorted out without ceremony, his protests echoed down the hallway. But no one answered. They had already chosen survival over loyalty to arrogance. Weeks turned into months, and the company's reputation transformed. What could have been scandal became triumph. Investors praised decisive leadership. Customers admired integrity. New contracts flooded in. Employees felt pride in belonging to a company that had taken a public stand. The very act of humiliation had become the foundation of strength. One evening, as he walked through another branch, an older janitor approached timidly. His uniform was faded, his hands rough from years of work. He said softly, "Sir, I heard what happened. I just want to say thank you. People like me, we notice when someone finally sees us." As I looked into man's weary eyes and felt a weight lift. This was why it mattered, not the headlines, not the boardroom praise, but the simple dignity of a man who finally felt seen. The climax came during the annual shareholder meeting. The auditorium filled Every seat occupied, the lights dimmed, the murmurs hushed as he took the stage. This was the moment where power would be tested, where the board, the investors, the employees would decide if his bold strike was brilliance or folly. He spoke with calm authority, not reading from notes, but from conviction. We face a choice. When arrogance walked through our doors, we could ignore it, excuse it, or confront it. I chose confront it. Because silence is complicity, and complicity is death for a company built on people, not walls. If that choice offends you, then you should not be invested here. The room erupted into applause, the kind that begins cautious but swells into thunder. He did not smile. He only bowed his head slightly and let the sound wash over him, for in that moment the battle was won not only against one receptionist or one branch, but against a disease of entitlement that had threatened to hollow the company from within. When the applause faded, he ended with a final sentence: respect costs nothing, but without it you lose everything. The silence that followed was not emptiness, but reverence, and every person in the room knew they had witnessed not just a speech, but a transformation.